In this lecture, we are going to discuss data inventories. We will begin by defining what a data inventory is. We will then look at the different business functions, the different folks throughout the organization that typically have inventory-related responsibilities. And we will conclude by discussing what you need in order to build a data inventory of your own. So what is a data inventory? A data inventory, also known as a data map, identifies data and data categories. It also identifies risk and mitigations for the data. A data inventory maps the data flow through systems and throughout the organization. A data inventory also identifies the data's location and how the data is shared. Finally, a data inventory allows us to assess data quality as well as the value that data brings to the organization and whether or not there are any data disparities or discrepancies. There are a number of different offices throughout the organization that typically have responsibility for a data inventory. If your organization has a chief data officer or an office of the chief data officer, they typically have primary responsibility for the data inventory through their data governance function. Privacy and IT and cybersecurity also have responsibilities as well. In some organizations, the budget required for supporting a data inventory may be shared across different functions. If you are building a data inventory or if your CDO is building an inventory, it's very likely that they're going to be consulting with the relevant stakeholders throughout the organization. And that's because even though an IT office may own all of the systems and the network, it's unlikely they own all of the data. Instead, it would be different offices throughout the organization that own the data. And of course, if you want to inventory all of that data, you're going to need to work well with those stakeholders. Finally, a major responsibility of all of these different offices is going to be to ensure that the inventory adheres to all necessary laws, regulations, and policies. In fact, part of building a data inventory is going to be determining which laws, regulations, and policies apply to the organization's data. In this and the next slide, we're going to look at the different characteristics or features of a data inventory. And so this is really less about how to build an inventory than it is about how to categorize your data into a data inventory. The actual building of the inventory, locating all of the data, mapping it, that's the initial part of the process. And once you have all of the data in one location, or you've identified where all of the data lives throughout the organization, then you're really going to want to build a lot of context and purpose around that data. And that's what we're going to be discussing here. As I just mentioned, once you've identified the data, you want to identify the context and purpose for the data. How is it collected? Who is it collected from? What is the purpose of collection? How is the data being processed? How is it being safeguarded? What different laws, regulations, and policies apply to that data, etc. You also want to identify who the inventory owner is, as well as who has legal oversight over the inventory and the data. Similar to identifying the office that is collecting and processing the data, as you're doing that, you're going to be identifying the data controller and processor. You want to identify the data volume, and so how much of each type of data do you have? Alongside the data, you're going to be categorizing the types of data that you have. For example, is it personal data? And also identifying the sensitivity of the data. When it comes to identifying data sensitivity, often a very simple low, medium, and high is sufficient. But how you categorize your data and what level of sensitivity it is often going to depend on the jurisdiction and the industry. And so just as a quick example, a name and phone number may be low sensitivity, whereas medical records or financial data would be high. Other features of the data that you're going to want to build out include format. And so is it in paper, electronic format? Is it structured or unstructured data? What is the use or again, the purpose of the data? What is the retention and disposition policy? Meaning how long are you retaining the data for? And as we'll discuss later, there are often legal requirements. For certain types of records, for example, it's required that that record be retained for 7 years, or 10 years, or 45 days. Or in some cases, in the federal government, some records must be retained for 250 years. You also want to identify the storage, where is the physical location of the server on which the data is housed. For example, is this on a Microsoft Cloud server that's located in Seattle, Washington? What are the different access points for the data? And so if an individual wants to access this data, how are they going to gain that access? Is the data shared internally or externally, and if so, with who? And finally, are there any transfers of the data, internal, external, or international? In this lecture, we discussed what a data inventory is. You need to remember that a data inventory identifies the data and data categories, risks and risk mitigations. Data inventories help to map data's flow through systems and throughout an organization. Data inventories identify a data's location and how that data is shared, and it allows us to assess data quality. Inventory responsibilities are shared throughout an organization. The top 3 are likely to be a data governance or chief data officer, privacy, and IT. And financial support for the data inventory is often gathered from different offices throughout an organization. And I will not read through the list of how to build a data inventory here again. Of course, you can always rewind the video or hit pause and read through on your own.